Welcome to our post-election night recap here at Access Humboldt. I'm your political analyst, Charles Douglas. I was with you for 3 hours last night, live on election night, along with my colleagues at KMUD, Redway Community Radio. They were live from Redway in southern Humboldt. Here at the Community Media Center, we're proud to bring you election night results for 3 big elections in a row, and of course, nothing's quite as big as a presidential general election this year, 2012. Let's see those results. Barack Obama is re-elected and will stay in the Oval Office for another 4 years. Barack Obama, we're projecting he's winning Florida at this point, where he's ahead by about half a percentage vote. That leads him to get about 332 electoral votes versus 206 for Mitt Romney. In terms of a raw total, he's about 2.5 million votes ahead of the former Massachusetts governor. Romney was ahead in the popular vote, but behind in the electoral vote most of last night. But now Obama is getting a clear, absolute majority of popular votes as well as electoral votes. Gary Johnson, the Libertarian former governor of New Mexico, topping 1 million votes. That's the best result for a third-party candidate since Ralph Nader in 2000. And Jill Stein with the Green Party way back in the pack with just under 400,000 votes. Again, the Electoral College map is looking extremely similar to the one you saw in 2008. Primarily, Romney picked up North Carolina and Indiana, but otherwise, Obama held on to the gains the Democrats made 4 years ago. Looking at the U.S. Senate, Dianne Feinstein, she was first elected in 1992 and is continuing to cruise ahead with all the money and the name recognition to another 6-year term in the U.S. Senate. Dianne Feinstein with 61% of the vote over Elizabeth Emkin, the Republican challenger who suffered from a lack of public notoriety and funding. Again, because of the top 2 primary system imposed upon California by Prop 14 a couple years ago, voters had no third-party candidates and no write-in candidates in this race. So in weeks to come, political analysts will certainly be looking at the number of blank ballots cast in this contest. Looking at the U.S. Congress, because of redistricting that happened because of the census, we have a new North Coast congressional district. Our old congressman of 14 years, Mike Thompson, was shoved eastward into a new 5th district. He got reelected there in the Napa, Southern Lake County, and other farmland areas to the east. But our new district includes coastal Sonoma and Marin counties, as well as Mendo, Humboldt, Del Norte, and Trinity. And in this district, Jared Huffman, the 3-term assembly member from the San Rafael area, easily won election to his first term in Congress with over 70% of the vote over Mill Valley investment banker Dan Roberts. Dan, one of the 2 Republicans in that race, barely squeaked ahead, as you recall, in the June primary of Norman Solomon, who is a more progressive candidate from coastal Marin County. Roberts mostly loaned his campaign money and simply couldn't raise outside funds necessary to compete with Jared Huffman, who had big backing from unions, trial lawyers, wineries, and other interests across the district. Looking at the state assembly now, Wes Chesbro, he's been in office collectively for 12 years now, 8 years as a state senator, served 2 terms already in the state assembly, and now is going to serve his final term. Wes Chesbro with 86,835 votes, well ahead of Sonoma County Planning Commissioner and fellow Democrat Tom Lynch, who received just a hair under 50,000 votes. So that's all of our statewide and national contests we're looking at. So Humboldt County results match those district-wide and statewide results pretty clearly, although Roberts did slightly better here in Humboldt County. Now we're going to look at those statewide propositions and compare how Humboldt County voted to how voters counted across the state of California last night. Looking first at Prop 30, this is the one Jerry Brown, our governor, was staking his political career on. And Prop 30, behind most of the night, is now passing with 4.9 million votes in its favor versus 4.2 million votes against. That's a difference of almost 8 percentage points now. Humboldt County voters were a bit more lopsided in this one, with 63% of Humboldt voters in favor of raising sales taxes and income taxes on the wealthy in California to keep us from having further cuts to education. I should add also that Prop 30 also protects funding for realignment, where counties, including Humboldt County, are being made more responsible for low-level offenders and imprisoning them or putting them on probation or parole systems locally. Prop 31, that was an attempt by a group called California Forward, which is funded by Hewlett-Packard and other big business interests, the same folks that brought us the top 2 system of Prop 14. They wanted to stick California with a 2-year budget cycle and also force pay-as-you-go budgeting, where voters would only be able to put in new funding if they cut funding somewhere else. In other words, state legislatures would have to identify tax increases or identify programs to slash to fund anything new. Prop 31 really badly rejected by the voters of California by over 20 percentage points, with 5.2 million voters coming out against, just over 3 1/3 million voters in favor. Humboldt County voters voted similarly. Prop 32, that was an attempt to restrict the ability of unions to use payroll contributions to fund election campaigns. Humboldt County voters were about 3/5 against this initiative, and Prop 32 is also failing statewide by over 1 million votes as of today. Prop 33, this is the 3rd attempt by the head of Mercury Insurance to punish drivers if they've let their auto insurance lapse, and then also make some slight rate adjustments in favor of drivers who have consistent auto insurance coverage. It failed twice before, and it's failing again by almost 10 percentage points. Humboldt County voters, only 35% voted in favor of Prop 33. Prop 34, criminal justice reform advocates had some really high hopes for this one, but it appears to be going down to a narrow defeat both in Humboldt County and statewide. Prop 34, which would have replaced the state death penalty with permanent imprisonment, failing by about 500,000 votes at this hour. Prop 35 received very little attention. It simply enhanced the criminal penalties for human trafficking. The most lopsided victory of the night, Prop 35, with 81% in favor statewide, 79% in favor in Humboldt County. Prop 36, this was the victory of the night for criminal justice reform advocates. It amends the 3 strikes law to make that 3rd strike only apply if the 3rd strike was a serious or violent felony instead of just stealing a pizza. Prop 36 passing by a 2-to-1 margin across the state and by a 3-to-1 margin here in Humboldt County. Prop 37, this was the major division between the way Humboldt County voters felt and the way state voters felt. Humboldt County, Prop 37 to label genetically modified organism in food, it passed 65% yes, but Prop 37 in California right now is failing by over 500,000 votes, and although some folks are hoping is going to catch up, that doesn't appear likely at this hour. Prop 38, that was the so-called Munger initiative that would have passed across the board income tax increases, that's state income taxes, even on working class Californians, and it failed and failed miserably. The worst defeat of the night statewide, 72% voting no across California, 69% voting no in Humboldt County. Prop 39, that closes a loophole to bring in about $1 billion to fund the state budgets and also to fund clean energy programs. Prop 39 passing by a 3-to-2 margin across the states and by about 64% voting yes in Humboldt County. Finally, Prop 40, that was a referendum on a previously approved state Senate district map. The Citizens Redistricting Commission redrew the state Senate districts, and the Republican Party originally wanted a referendum so that they could overturn these maps, but then they abandoned their own effort, and the vote pretty much shows that. 71% voting in favor of retaining these maps, and a similar percentage voting that way in Humboldt County. So those are your statewide election results. As far as the initiatives, we could see some tightening of those races for Props 34 and 37, but at this point there's just been too many ballots counted to make much of a difference in those races. Now the moment you've been waiting for: how did our local election contest turn out? I was up till about 1:30 a.m. last night to wait the final results coming out. The Time Standard had already gone to bed along with the rest of the media, but we brought it to you first online, and here it is. Eureka City Council, Linda Atkins, facing a tough re-election battle for her Ward 2 seat. Linda Atkins polled an over 200 vote lead, exactly 208 votes ahead of Joe Bonino. That's 39-35 to 37-27 for Joe Bonino, a member of the Republican Central Committee and a payroll clerk at Humboldt State University. Charlie Bean, the write-in candidate, just couldn't gain much traction in this race. He had about 35 write-in votes. There's about 50-some write-in votes in this race that are, well, let's say unresolved according to county election officials, but that's not going to make a difference. Mathematically, it is possible that late absentee ballots or provisional ballots cast by folks whose registration status was unclear could make a difference, but in general, those votes tend to trend a little liberal. So it's extremely unlikely that Joe Bonino would be able to catch up with those ballots as they're counted over the next couple weeks by County Elections Office. Looking at the Fortuna City Council, these are 2 at-large seats. Fortuna has 5 at-large council seats, and then they select a mayor from amongst themselves. The incumbent mayor, Doug Strell, who's been in office for about 1.5 terms now, cruised easily to re-election with 2,675 votes. And that second seat is going to newcomer Tammy Gillum Trent with 1,817 votes. The third place finisher, who's not going to get a seat in this race, was Joshua Brown, who advocated for locating a big box megastore like Walmart in Fortuna. He received 1,141 votes, and he's not going to catch up with those last-minute ballots, 38 write-in votes in this race. One race we didn't touch on last night was Mayor of Ferndale. Stu Titus, who is an incumbent council member, Ferndale, like Eureka, elects its mayor separately, was up against Ken Weller. And what do you know? We have a deadlock. No check mark in this race. 287 votes to 287 votes. Certainly every vote counts, and we had several dozen votes in this race, not shown on screen here, but they were, as they say, undervotes, or ballots that were turned in blank on this race. So folks really could have made a difference if they decided to make up their minds to select the mayor of Ferndale. There were 22 write-in votes, but there were no qualified write-in candidates in this race, so those aren't really going to count. We can't predict a winner in this race because of the deadlock. We will have, again, last-minute mail-in ballots that were turned in at the polls. I know I did that myself here in Eureka. And there's also provisional ballots to be counted. We'll find out later from Registrar of Voters Carolyn Cernich about how many of those there are. And if there's still a deadlock at the end of that process, well, the two fellows will just have to flip a coin. Looking at Ferndale City Council, they have 2 at-large seats they're electing. The incumbent, Ken Mirzwa, is cruising to re-election with 343 votes, and newcomer Daniel Brown likes to join him with 319 votes. There was a qualified write-in candidate in this race, Lino Mogny. He has about 55 votes, and about 79 write-in votes are still unresolved, but that's not nearly enough for Mr. Mogny to catch up. Looking also at a race we didn't quite cover last night, the Southern Humboldt Community Healthcare District. They, of course, run Gerald Phelps Community Hospital, the only real healthcare center in Southern Humboldt County. Right now, Corrine Stromstad, one of the incumbents in this race, is winning with 1,051 votes, and ahead of her will be newcomer David Ordonez with 1,069 votes. A pretty tight race. Corrine is only 60 votes ahead of Beth Bennett Allen. She has 981 votes, and Karen Ruth far back in the pack with 851 votes. Again, these are for 2 seats serving 4-year terms. Not to confuse you, but there's another Southern Humboldt Healthcare District seat. This is a single seat that only serves a 2-year term due to a resignation of a former Healthcare District Board of Director member. And the incumbent in this race, Clifton Anderson, looks like he's going to go down to defeat by exactly 101 votes Judith Gonzalez, who's a longtime community member down there. She's receiving 1,238 votes at this hour, 8 write-ins cast in this race. Again, that's for a single 2-year seat on the Sohum Healthcare District Board. So that's of all of our local elected offices. There are, of course, some uncontested results. Melinda Cirbellini here in Eureka received about 67.5% in her Ward 4 seat, running against, well, nobody. There were a couple of hundred write-in candidates, write-in votes for candidates that weren't qualified. I understand some folks wrote in Chris Kerrigan, the former Ward 4 City Council member, but he didn't file to be a write-in, so that doesn't count. And there were a couple of thousand ballots for the Ward 4 seat that were turned in blank. So I don't know what kind of commentary that is by local voters on their confidence in the incumbent, but nonetheless, Melinda Cirbellini, who was appointed to that seat when Frank Yeager got elected mayor, that was his former Ward 4 seat, she will serve a fresh 4-year term now as an elected instead of an appointed member of the Eureka City Council. Also in Arcata, the 3 incumbents were on the ballot, but none of the opposing candidates could get it together to get 20 signatures to qualify for the ballot there. And Mayor Michael Winkler, Vice Mayor Shane Brinton, and Councilmember Susan Ornelas will all serve another 4-year term at the Arcata City Council. Now looking at our local ballot initiatives. We had several initiatives, and all but one of them won last night. Measure D, that required a 55% approval because it's a school bond, specifically school bonds to help the Fortuna School District, which is a newly unified school district with the old Ronerville district. And even 60% of voters in Fortuna voted in favor of Measure D, a difference of about 1,300 votes. There was a pair of measures in Arcata to fund local schools. To be specific, this is the Arcata Elementary School District, which covers the central core of the city of Arcata, but excludes the Bayside Sunnybury areas and excludes the Pacific Union School District in the north part of town. The Arcata school parcel tax, because it's a property tax, required a 2/3 approval and got 77% of the vote. Pretty astounding for a property tax in Arcata. Almost 2,000 votes ahead of the no votes in that race. That's Measure E. Then its companion measure, Measure F, would be to issue the school bonds based on that funding. That needed 55% of the vote, and it got 74% of the vote. So Arcata voters voting strongly in favor of education funding in this election. Measure G would simply renew a sales tax that's already been on the books for about 8 years in Trinidad. That's 0.75% for all sales in Trinidad on top of the state sales tax, which of course just went up by 1/4 point thanks to Proposition 30. Measure G passing by a 97 to 78 vote margin. There's only about 450 residents in Trinidad. So we could see that vote total change conceivably, but it looks pretty certain that with 55% in favor, Measure G is going to pass, and Trinidad will continue to be tied for the highest sales tax rate in Humboldt County, tied with Arcata, of course. Measure H, speaking of Arcata, this was a fairly symbolic measure to ban corporate personhood in Arcata, except when it conflicts with other laws. And of course, the California Corporations Code, which is state law, already codifies corporate personhood. So there's not much practical effect to this measure. It's really symbolically saying corporations aren't people. Corps ain't peeps was the motto in this campaign. It was forwarded by Arcata former councilmember Dave Meserve, and it's passing pretty handily with 81% voting in favor of Measure H. By the way, a similar measure passed countywide in Mendocino County last night as well. Measure I, that has a bit more teeth for folks who are using about 6 times more than the baseline energy usage on their Pacific Gas and electric bills in Arcata will be slapped with a huge energy tax. And after PG&E is paid off for redoing their billing system, that money will flow into city coffers to the general fund for the city council to do with as they wish. Measure I, which really targets indoor marijuana grow operations in Arcata, passing by a 69 to 31% margin as of today. Lastly, Measure J, this was the defeat of the evening. It was the second attempt by city officials in Rio Dell to issue street improvement bonds. If you've ever driven through Rio Dell, you can see why they feel that way. It needed a 2/3 vote. It only got 54.9% voting in favor. That's actually worse than the results it received back in June. 492 votes in favor, 404 votes against. That's about 900 votes overall, so they would have needed about 100 more votes to pass that initiative. So that's all of our local initiative and state initiative, all of our state, national, and local candidates. We're really happy to bring you live election night coverage here at Access Humboldt, the 3rd big election in a row we've been able to do so. I want to thank our partners at KMUD, Redway Community Radio, for working with us to bring you 3 hours of uninterrupted live election night coverage last night. I really want to thank Assemblymember and new Congressman Jared Huffman for calling in for an interview last night, and of course the whole crew here at Access Humboldt, from our Executive Director Sean McLaughlin to our crew members, Leila Asai, Juan Carrillo, Jed Pinnell, Brett Hanover, I'm sure Megan Marley, so many great folks here who made this election night possible. Don't forget, we'll be replaying these election night results at 12, 2, 4, and 6 o'clock today. So for all of us here at Access Humboldt, thank you for making democracy possible. We are local voices through community media, and we're depending on you to make this democracy work. Thanks for joining us.